Good afternoon, children.
Good afternoon.
So we had completed the transmission of generation and transmission of nerve impulse along the axon. And now we need to know what happens when this nerve impulse reaches the synapse. What do you mean by a synapse? Steffi, what is a synapse?
Functional junction between two
Two
neurons.
neurons. So let's see how it crosses the synapse. Transmission of nerve impulse is through synapses, because if it has to be transmitted from one nerve cell to the other, it has to cross the synapse. Synapses are junctions formed by the membranes of post and presynaptic neurons. So suppose if two nerve cells are there, so the synaptic membrane of the first one, you can call it as presynaptic neuron, and the other one postsynaptic neuron. When two neurons are interacting, the first one, the presynaptic neuron, and the postsynaptic neuron, or else the junction between two neurons. So one we can consider as presynaptic. So before the synaptic region, after the synaptic region, the neuron that comes postsynaptic neuron. And then there is a gap. You can find a gap between the two neurons. In between the two neurons, there will be a gap. You call this gap a synaptic cleft. So synaptic cleft is the gap between two neurons. The gap separating pre and post synaptic neurons. So already I told you what is post and presynaptic neuron, and sometimes these will be very closely present, so they may or may not be present. In majority of the cases you find a synaptic cleft. So once again I'll repeat the points. So we had learned how the transmission of a nerve impulse is taking place along the nerve cell. Now how this nerve impulse gets transmitted to the next neuron. You understood how it is passing along a single neuron. Once it reaches the end of one,
Ma'am, you're not audible.
so we were discussing about the transmission of nerve impulses. So you have understood how a nerve impulse is transmitted along a nerve cell. And once it reaches the end of the nerve cell, how this gets transmitted to the next neuron, to the adjacent nerve cell, you're going to learn. For that, the nerve impulse should cross synapse. Synapse is the functional junction between two neurons. The space or the gap between, or the functional junction between two neurons is known as synapse. A little more specifically, you can say it is a junction formed by the membranes of pre and post synaptic neuron. The nerve cell before that gap is known as presynaptic neuron. The one which comes after the synapse is known as postsynaptic neuron. Okay, pre and postsynaptic neuron. And there you can find a gap. The gap is separated, the gaps which is separating these two neurons, pre and postsynaptic neuron, you will call it as synaptic cleft. So synaptic cleft is the gap which separates the pre and postsynaptic neurons. In certain cases, synaptic cleft will be absent. That means it will be very closely bound. Some cases it will be present. That is why it is mentioned may or may not be present. So you learned about synapse and synaptic cleft here. Synapse is the junction formed by the membranes of pre and postsynaptic neurons, whereas synaptic cleft is the gap which will separate pre and postsynaptic neurons. Now, let's learn about the different types of synapses. Electrical and chemical synapses are there. Electrical and chemical synapses. Now we will see the difference between electrical and chemical synapses. Let's start with electrical synapses. Membranes of neurons will be in close proximity. So in case of electrical synapses, the membranes of post and presynaptic neuron will be very closely attached, or they'll be in close proximity. They'll be very closer, and hence electric current directly flows from one neuron to another. They don't need assistance of certain other substances. In chemical synapses, some specialized chemicals are needed for the transmission of impulses. But in electrical synapses, they flow directly, the electric current flows directly from one neuron to the other. They don't need the assistance of any chemicals. We have learned about neurotransmitters, which you will be discussing in chemical synapses. Here, it directly flows, no chemicals are released, no neurotransmitters are required, and it is similar to the conduction along a single axon. You know, when along the axon, when the nerve impulse is getting transmitted, it gets transmitted very fast, and they directly flow. The electric current is flowing from one part to the other, one region. Hope you are remembering what we learned in first period, from site A moving to site B. So that easily it moves. In electrical synapses, the movement of the electric current from one neuron to another takes place very smoothly as it takes place along a single axon. And it is rare in our system. In human bodies, it's not completely absent. We too have electrical synapses, but these are more common in invertebrates. Okay, and less in vertebrates. When compared to invertebrates, we have less number of electrical synapses, and it's very fast. The transmission of the impulses along an electrical synapses will be very fast. So these are the points you need to know about electrical synapses. First of all, it is very fast. It's rare in our system, means it's more common in invertebrates than in vertebrates. Then it takes place here in electrical synapses. The neurons will be lying very close together, and the transmission or the electric current will flows very smoothly from one neuron to the other, just like the impulse is moving along a single axon. Any doubt? Shall I proceed to the next slide?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Chemical synapses. Here you need to know so many points, means so many terms you're learning here, like neurotransmitters, synaptic vesicles. Okay, listen carefully. Membranes of, here there is synaptic cleft. Pre and post synaptic neurons are separated by a fluid filled space known as synaptic cleft. Whereas when we discussed about electrical, just a minute, children. Yes. So in the previous one, we learned that they are in close proximity. The neurons are in close proximity, but here the neurons are separated by a fluid-filled space that you call a synaptic cleft. Already we discussed about synaptic cleft. So here you can see the presynaptic membrane. So this is the ending part of one neuron, whereas this is the beginning part of the other neuron, presynaptic, and this one is postsynaptic. And in between these two, you can see synaptic cleft. This is the synaptic cleft, which is filled with some substances that we will discuss what are those. So some substances are there, and once again I will repeat. In case of chemical synapses, the membranes of pre and post synaptic neurons, they are separated by a fluid filled space. You call it as synaptic cleft. Okay, whereas in the previous one, in electrical synapses, I told the neurons will be lying in close proximity, but here you find a gap in between. You call it a synaptic cleft. It is a fluid filled space. Where do you find synaptic cleft? In chemical synapses, in between post and presynaptic neuron, you will find a fluid-filled space that is known as synaptic cleft. Okay, that hope you have understood. Now, axon terminals. What do you mean by axon terminals? Anybody? What do you mean by axon terminals? Answer is there in the question itself. Children, turn the videos on. You want me to call out your name? Naureen, tell me, what do you mean by axon terminals?
Axonite.
Axonite. That means the tip of the
Axon.
axon, tip of the axon or axon terminals, or we call it as axonites. The axon branches are axonites, and the tip of these axon terminals, this is one axon terminal. What you see here is the axon terminal, and there you can see synaptic vesicles, some bag-like structures, synaptic vesicles. See, round bag-like structures which are filled with certain substances you can find. Where do you find these synaptic vesicles? In the axon terminals. And axon terminals contain some synaptic vesicles. And what are present in these synaptic vesicles? Neurotransmitters. Do you remember what are neurotransmitters? Can anybody name one neurotransmitter? Anybody?
Acetylcholine.
Acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is one neurotransmitter. So they will help, as the name suggests, they will help in the transmission of nerve impulse from one neuron to the other. So at the tip of the axon, some vesicles, some bag-like structures are present which are filled with some chemicals. You call it as neurotransmitters. Okay, then now let's see what happens. Now, you know the impulse, the nerve impulse, it will be traveling along the axon, reaches the axon terminal, and once it reaches the axon terminal, the synaptic vesicles, you can see them moving towards the membrane. So, these synaptic vesicles will be present in so these are present here. But when the stimulus or when the impulse reaches here, you can find them moving towards the membrane. They'll move towards the membrane, and then what happens? They will fuse with the membrane and they will release. You can find them releasing the neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters are shown as black, small bubble-like structures. They are denoted by those round structures. So they will fuse with the membrane and release these neurotransmitters. And what happens to these neurotransmitters? They will slowly move and they will bind with receptors. See here, these are the receptors. So they will come and bind with these receptors. And then what happens? Once they bind with these receptors, this will open the ion channels through where the ions can get transferred or transmitted, and this will promote the entry of ions. And hope you are remembering about the generation of action potential. When the permeability of the ions got changed, only action potential was generated. So here also, when these neurotransmitters come and get attached to these receptors, the permeability of the ions will change. Some ion channels will open. This will promote the entry of ions, and as a result, a new action potential, a potential will be generated in the post-synaptic neuron, and this is a slow process. I'll repeat all the points once again. I hope you don't have any doubt with the electrical synapses. So chemical synapse, I'm going to repeat once again. All those who did not understand can listen it once again. Okay. So chemical synapses, unlike electrical synapses, these are very slow. Electrical synapses are very fast. Then another point of difference that we learned was electrical synapses, there the neurons are in close proximity. But here you can see there is a gap in between post and presynaptic neuron. You call it a synaptic cleft. Okay. Then you call it a synaptic cleft. And the tip of the axons, what do they have? Tip of the axon or axon terminals are provided with what? Certain structures are there. What do you call it, children? What do you call?
Synaptic vesicles.
Synaptic vesicles. What do these synaptic vesicles contain?
Neurotransmitters.
Neurotransmitters.
Not the same person always. Why everyone's video is off? Do turn it on. So these are loaded with Rijas. What do these synaptic vesicles contain?
Neurotransmitters.
Neurotransmitters. And once the impulse is reaching the synaptic vesicle, or once it is reaching the axon terminal, what will happen to the synaptic vesicles? One of you tell me. What will happen? Hope you got my question. Vidur. Impulse is reaching the axon terminal. I thought of repeating it again. So after I have reviewed it, wherever you have doubt, with that I will repeat it once again. Impulse is reaching the axon terminal. Inside the axon terminal, synaptic vesicles are there. Rijas told these synaptic vesicles are filled with neurotransmitters. So when the impulse is reaching the axon terminal, will the synaptic vesicles change its location? Whether will it move from there? Will it move from there, or it will fix to there?
It will move to
It will move to where?
plasma membrane.
Louder.
Plasma membrane.
Plasma membrane means the tip of the membrane. It will move towards the membrane, and then what happens? Steffi, what will happen? It will be moving towards the membrane. Then what happens?
This
Remember the
binding,
picture. Yes?
binding opens the ion channels.
No, it is moving towards the membrane. Then some step you have missed out. Malavika, can you tell me? I'll come back to you, Steffi.
They release neurotransmitters.
See, children, I told that there is some problem with the audio and I'm hearing your voice through the monitor. So if you can speak a little louder, it will be helpful. Yes.
They release neurotransmitters.
They fuse with the plasma membrane and will release
Neurotransmitter.
to where? To the gap. What do you call the gap?
Synaptic cleft.
Synaptic cleft. So they'll release the neurotransmitters to the synaptic cleft. Now, Steffi can answer. Not feeling well?
No.
Okay. So she told that once the impulse has reached the axon terminal, synaptic vesicle, that was told by Vidur. Synaptic vesicles will move towards the membrane. Then Malavika said it will fuse with the membrane, release the neurotransmitters into the synaptic cleft. Now what will happen? What these neurotransmitters role now? What do?
They
They'll move and get attached to, wait, I'll come back to you. Listen, after she has completed, you should repeat. Nandana,
They bind with their specific
they'll bind
receptors.
with specific receptors present where?
Postsynaptic neuron.
Postsynaptic neuron. Steffi, I know you're not feeling well. It's okay, no problem. Just take another chance. You heard what she said? These I'll repeat. You listen and repeat, okay? These neurotransmitters, which are released into the synaptic cleft, they'll move and they will get attached to the specific receptors present on postsynaptic neuron. Can you repeat?
the neurotransmitters get attached to the synaptic cleft in the plasma
And then they'll bind with
the specific
receptors present where?
plasma membrane.
Plasma membrane of which neuron?
Um,
Pre or post?
pre.
Second one, crossing the synapse. Then it should be postsynaptic neuron. And then what happens? Anna, now what happens?
This binding opens the ion channels.
Very good. So this will open some ion channels. And as a result, what will happen?
The embryo
Movement of ions will take place, and what will be generated? Potential will be generated. Okay, I'll just quickly recap that and then I'll proceed to the next slide. Okay, those who have doubts, just check it once again. So we were discussing about chemical synapses and I told you to note it's a very slow process, and in electrical synapses, which we discussed already, the two neurons are in close proximity. But here, the two neurons, pre and post synaptic neurons, are separated by a synaptic cleft. What is special about synaptic cleft? It's a fluid filled space. Okay, so that point is over. Now next, in the axon terminal, there are some vesicles. You call it as synaptic vesicles, and these are filled with neurotransmitters, which helps in the transmission of nerve impulse. And when the impulse is reaching the axon terminal, these synaptic vesicles will move towards the membrane. As you can see in the figure, they will be moving towards the membrane and then they will fuse with the plasma membrane. See, they are fusing with the plasma membrane and they will release the transmitters into the synaptic cleft. See, they are releasing it into the synaptic cleft. And these neurotransmitters, what they do now, they'll go and bind with the receptors which are present in the postsynaptic neuron or postsynaptic membrane. And when the binding of the neurotransmitters with the receptors takes place, when they bind, when the neurotransmitters bind with the receptors, it will open some ion channels so that ions will start entering and this will generate a new potential. In the second neuron, in the postsynaptic neuron, this process will get repeated again when it reaches the next synapse. And this process is very slow. And this potential can be excitatory or inhibitory. The function either it can inhibit something or it can stimulate something. Okay, that nerve impulse can be either inhibitory or excitatory, positive in or promoting some action or inhibiting some action. Any doubt now?
No, ma'am.
Please do respond whether you have doubt or not.
No, ma'am.
Can I
No, ma'am.
proceed? Sania, is it clear? Sania? Clear? Okay. Why your videos are off? Vidur, Rija, Sania, Anthony?
Ma'am,
Okay. Now, we are moving on to the next topic. Human neural system. Human nervous system or human neural system. Already briefly you have learned about human nervous system. Now let's learn more about human neural system. Under that we have learned broadly you can categorize human neural system into, which are the two broad categories? Before we proceed, tell me, which are the two broad categories? Vidur,
Central.
human nervous system can be broadly categorized into dash and dash. Punya?
Peripheral nervous system.
Peripheral nervous system and Vidur?
Central nervous system.
One is peripheral.
Central nervous system.
Central nervous system. I have some problem in hearing, as I told. Not my problem. This audio is not working. Okay. Central nervous system and peripheral nervous system. What comes under central nervous system? Sania? Central nervous system. Spinal cord. That comes first. What is, with what you are thinking, child? Brain and spinal cord. So we are going to learn in detail about brain, human brain. Okay, our human brain, we all know human brain is protected by a skull, the skeletal part, that is skull. Skull will protect your brain because brain is very delicate structure. It is protected by skull. It is having protective covering. Apart from having a skull covering or having a cranium, we even call a cranium to cover the brain. They have some membrane covering also. You call it as cranial meninges. It is 3-layered. Cranial meninges. This is the cranial meninges is the protective membrane covering of your brain. It's protected by inside a bony box known as skull or cranium. Apart from that, some membrane coverings are also there in order to provide protection to our brain. And this membrane, you call it as cranial meninges. And it is a 3-layered membrane. Meninges is having 3 layers. Now let's learn the name of these 3 layers. Dura mater, that is the outermost layer. Arachnoid, that is the middle layer, which is very thin compared to the other layers. Then pia mater, the inner layer. Inner layer means the one which is in close contact with the brain tissue. The first one or the first layer covering the brain, you call it as pia mater, then arachnoid and dura mater. So your brain is protected or it is placed inside a bony box or skull, and to give additional protection, it is covered by a 3-layered membrane. And the 3 layers are dura mater, outer layer, arachnoid, the middle layer, which is very thin, and pia mater, that is the inner layer, which is in contact with the brain tissue. Okay, which are the 3 layers? Which are the 3 layers, Anna?
Dura
Dura mater. You tell me the outer layer. Which is the outer layer? Dura mater. So which are the other 2 layers? Steffi?
Arachnoid and pia mater.
What is the difference, or what is a point I told about the middle layer, arachnoid?
Very
Punya?
thin.
Yes. Yes, Steffi?
Very thin middle layer.
It is very thin when compared to the other layers. Say one more figure you can see, just showing the different parts of the brain. So you will be learning about these different parts of the brain. Now, division of brain, how the brain is divided. Broadly, the brain is divided into 3 main parts, so 3 major regions. Forebrain, midbrain and hindbrain. Forebrain, midbrain, hindbrain, and forebrain consists of 3 parts. Cerebrum, thalamus, hypothalamus. Then we have midbrain. The hindbrain is further divided into pons, P-O-N-S, not P-O-N-D-S. Pons, cerebellum, and medulla. You have learned about these divisions in class 10. Hope you are remembering. So human brain broadly categorized into 3: forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain. And forebrain is divided into 3 parts: cerebrum, okay, cerebrum, thalamus, hypothalamus. They'll make up the forebrain. Then there is midbrain. Then pons, medulla, and cerebellum make up hindbrain. Okay, forebrain, midbrain, hindbrain. Forebrain consists of cerebrum, thalamus, hypothalamus. Then midbrain and hindbrain, pons, cerebellum, and medulla. Now we'll start with the forebrain. Let's see more about forebrain, the functions of forebrain, the parts of forebrain. As I told, it includes cerebrum, thalamus, and hypothalamus. Which are the 3 parts? Thalamus, hypothalamus and cerebrum. Cerebrum forms major part of the brain. The major part of the brain is made up of cerebrum, and it is divided into two parts, two hemispheres. It's the largest part of our brain, and it is divided into two parts, right and left cerebral hemispheres. So you can divide it into two parts, cerebrum into two parts, right and left hemispheres. And it is divided by means of a deep cleft. There is a division, there is a separation which divides cerebrum into two parts, right and left hemispheres. Then moving on to the next point, corpus callosum. So corpus callosum, I told you that these are separated. Right and left hemispheres are separated by means of a cleft. There is a cleft which is separating. At the same time, these two hemispheres are kept connected with the help of a structure known as corpus callosum. Corpus callosum help in keeping these two hemispheres, even though these are separated by means of a cleft. A cleft, or there is a separation which divides cerebrum into right and left hemispheres. And corpus callosum, it's a tract of nerve fibers, and these nerve fibers will keep these two hemispheres interconnected. Okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Why he wants to come again? Okay. So have you understood? Have you understood this,
Yes,
children?
ma'am.
Our forebrain consists of cerebrum, thalamus, hypothalamus. And cerebrum, it is divided by a deep cleft into right and left cerebral hemispheres. Even though they are separated by means of this cleft, there is a tract of nerve fibers which will keep these two hemispheres interconnected. So what do you call the tract of nerve fibers that keep these two hemispheres together? Anthony, what do you call that tract of fibers which keep these two parts together?
Corpus
Corpus
callosum.
callosum. Repeat.
Corpus callosum.
Corpus callosum. So if it is asked what is corpus callosum, what is its function? Corpus callosum is a tract of nerve fibers, and what is its role? To keep the right and left cerebral hemispheres to interconnect these two hemispheres. Now next is about cerebral cortex. Cerebral cortex is a layer of cells which cover the cerebral hemispheres, which consists of prominent folds. So you can see in the figure, the cerebral hemisphere, so cerebrum is not having a very smooth surface, but it is provided with so many furrows, like wrinkles. You can see so many furrows are there, and this is meant to increase the surface area. So if it is very smooth and shiny surface, the amount or the number of nerve cells that can get incorporated will be less. But when it is in the form of folds or furrows, they can increase the surface area to accommodate nerve cells. That is why they are provided with so much furrows or foldings. So cerebral cortex is the layer of cells which will cover the cerebral hemisphere. The outer part, the outer region of cerebrum is known as cerebral cortex. We even call it as gray matter. Are you remembering gray matter and white matter, children? Where did we discuss about gray and white matter? One of you tell me, where did we discuss about gray and white matter?
Absence of myelin sheath.
Yes?
Absence of myelin sheath.
When myelin sheath is absent, that region will be Or what color? Gray in color. If not, it will be white in color. Okay. So it is also known as the cerebral cortex. That is the outer region of cerebrum. You call it as gray matter because it is gray in appearance. And this is due to the high concentration of nerve cells. Because of the concentration of more nerve cells, the outer region remains gray in color. And cerebral cortex can be separated into different regions. So cerebral cortex is the outermost region. The outer region, the outer region is known as cerebral cortex, and as you can see in the figure, different areas are demarcated. So there are motor areas, sensory areas, association areas, and these areas, each area is concerned with a specific function. So each part or each area is having a specific function. Motor areas, sensory areas, then association areas. Association areas are those areas which is not divided or which is not clearly demarcated into motor or sensory areas. So once again, we'll repeat all the points we discussed about forebrain. I told you that forebrain consists of thalamus, hypothalamus, and cerebrum. And cerebrum is divided into right and left hemispheres by means of a deep cleft, and a tract of nerve fibers will be keeping these two hemispheres interconnected. You call it as corpus callosum. Then we learned about cerebral cortex. It is the outermost region. As you can see in the figure, this region is provided with so many foldings or furrows in order to increase the surface area. And this region, we even call it as gray matter because of the accumulation or because of the more amount of nerve cells present in this region. And then we learned about the different areas present, motor areas, sensory areas, and there are special areas which is not distinguished as motor or sensory areas. You call it as association areas. Association areas, they are responsible for functions like memory, communication, intersensory association. So the information received from different senses will be associated, will be combined with the help of this association areas. For example, when you see a food item, you see it, okay, and at the same time you smell it, and then you find out, or your brain tells you that it smells like biryani, it looks like biryani, so it is biryani. So intersensory association, okay, that is brought about by merging together or combining the information received by different senses. Intersensory association, memory, communication, all that is brought about by association areas. So as I told you, cerebral cortex is the outer part. Then there is an inner region which you call it as medulla. Even in kidney also we have a cortex and medullary region, and here cerebral medulla and cerebral cortex is there. Cerebral cortex is gray in color, and cerebral medulla, we call it as white matter because of the white color. As our Punya said, it's because of the presence of myelinated nerve cells present and fibers of tracts present in the inner part of the membrane. So outer part of cerebral hemisphere, so cerebrum, you call it as cerebral cortex. And inner region, cerebral medulla. Outer region or cerebral cortex is grayish in color. You call it as gray matter because of the accumulation of more neurons, because it is furrowed. It can accommodate more neurons. It is gray in appearance, whereas the inner region, you call it as cerebral medulla. Their myelinated sheaths are present, nerve cells are present. So you call it as white matter because of the opaque white color of that region. Then there is thalamus and hypothalamus remaining. See the figure and the location of thalamus and hypothalamus. It is meant for coordinating sensory and motor signaling. Hypothalamus is at the below thalamus. Okay, thalamus. Then below thalamus, there is hypothalamus, and it controls your body temperature, hunger, thirst. Hunger, thirst, temperature, etc. are controlled by the structure which is present below your thalamus, known as hypothalamus. Whereas thalamus regulates sensory and motor signaling. And hypothalamus also secretes, has got some neurosecretory cells, and they produce, we have already learned chemical control and coordination. So it acts as, it has got endocrine functions. These are provided with neurosecretory cells, which will produce different hypothalamic hormones. Already we discussed in the previous chapter. So hypothalamus, apart from regulating your hunger, thirst, temperature, etc., they also have some endocrine functions. They are provided with neurosecretory cells which release hormones, and these hormones play specific roles, so they perform different roles in our body, and detailed functions of all that we had already discussed in the previous chapter. Any doubts? Any doubts?
No, ma'am.
So about forebrain, what are the points we learned? Naureen?
It includes cerebrum, thalamus, and hypothalamus.
Okay. Malavika?
Cerebrum is divided into left and right cerebral hemispheres and is
Told
connected.
about my hearing ability today.
Cerebrum is divided into left and right hemispheres
Okay, okay.
and connected
But they are
by
kept together by?
corpus callosum.
Okay, good. Then Vidur, next point.
Cerebral cortex.
Oh,
Cerebral cortex.
cerebral cortex.
A layer of cells covering the cerebral covering cerebral hemispheres, which consist
Reading
of
I can also do. I'm asking you to say the answer. Cerebral cortex is provided with?
layer of cells
Huh?
which covers cerebral hemispheres.
It's the outermost part. It's provided with numerous foldings. Event? Okay, then. What color is cerebral cortex?
Gray matter.
Why?
Myelin sheath is absent. Myelin sheath is absent.
Little more louder, Vidur.
Myelin sheath is absent.
It is gray in color because of the presence of
high concentration of neurons.
because of the high concentration of nerve cells. Donna?
Cerebral cortex consists of three parts, and they are motor areas,
Motor areas. You're reading, Donna? Are you reading? Steffi?
motor.
God bless you. About to sneeze, no? Sensory areas, motor areas, and association areas. What did we learn about association areas? Rijas? What did we learn about association areas, Rijas?
It is responsible for the complex functions like sensory association, memory and communication. Memory and communication.
Okay. Memory and
communication.
Communication. Okay. Then what else we learned, Nandana?
Cerebral medulla.
Cerebral
They are
medulla.
the fibers inside the hemispheres, and they're called white matter because of its white opaque appearance and presence of myelin.
Okay, we'll wind up, and within another 10 minutes we can complete the chapter, but it's already time. So next class we might get after 2 days. Maybe Monday we'll get, because I'm having revision classes. Friday, I don't know, maybe we'll have, if we are meeting on Friday, we'll complete the chapter on Friday. Okay. So see you next class, children. Thank you.